Given Taiwan's powerful neighbor China, which claims Taiwan as part of its own territory, what lessons do you think that we need to learn here from Ukraine's experience in defending sovereignty and civil rights?
I think that you have to learn the very simple thing that you have no time. If you want to live in peace, you have to prepare for all possible scenarios. And this is not obligation just of political elites or for militaries, it's obligation for each person in society. It's common obligation, which you have to fulfill now because you have no time. You never know what will happen tomorrow.
Hello and welcome to Connected. I'm Divya Gopalan. Oleksandra Matviichuk has Vladimir Putin in her sights. She's a human rights defender and was awarded the Nobel Peace Prize in 2022 for her work with Ukraine's Center for Civil Liberties. Now, since Russia's full-scale invasion more than 2.5 years ago, much of the focus of the Ukrainian human rights organization has been on documenting atrocities and war crimes. She believes the lack of international accountability for authoritarian leaders has led to global conflicts and systemic and flagrant abuses of human rights. She spoke to us about her efforts to establish a tribunal for the Russian president, which would include an international mechanism that would bring to justice all levels of Russian military and civilian leaderships. I started our conversation by asking her where we are in the war in Ukraine now.
It's a very good question because we have no idea. Either we are in the end of this war, in the middle of this war, or just in the beginning of this war. Because Russia is preparing for a long, protracted war. Russia only officially spent 40% of their budget for military expenses. And this is very naive to think that Russia is preparing for a war just with Ukraine. Because this is not just a war between two states, this is a war between two systems, authoritarianism and democracy, and existence of free world always provide a threat to dictatorship to load their power. That's why if we not be able to stop Putin in Ukraine, he will go further.
You have described part of what you do as endlessly cataloging human pain. In that context, can you tell us what your mission at the Center of Civil Liberties is?
We witnessed how this war turned people into the numbers because the scale of our crimes grows so large that it's become impossible to recognize all the stories. So what we as a team and our partners are doing, we are returning people their names because life of each person matters, because only justice have this ability to return people their names and show that they're not just numbers, they're not just like some thing like casualty, that they're human beings. And that is why we created together with partners all Ukrainian network of local documentators. We covered the whole country, including the occupied territories, and working together only for these 2 years of large-scale war, we jointly documented more than 80,000 episodes of war crimes.
Can you explain to me what that process is and why that is the focus of the Center of Civil Liberties?
We use different sources how to collect evidence about war crimes which Russian troops are committing in territory of Ukraine. We collect testimonies of witnesses and victims. We send mobile groups to work on the occupied territories. We analyze open data with further verification. And we are able, if something happened in Ukraine-controlled part of territory, like several days ago, Russia hit something in Odessa, to send our local groups to be on a place to work there, to ask questions to witness, to make photos and videos, and to download everything with the collecting database. Because this work has not just military dimension, but also informational dimension. And Russia uses war crimes as a method of warfare, but pretends that they not do anything bad to civilians. And that's why it's very important for the purpose of justice and for the purpose of truth, to collect everything which going on in reality.
Does your organization also monitor Ukrainian troops, for instance, once they've invaded the Russian territory of Kursk?
We collect each criminal episodes regardless of the sides, because as a human rights defenders, we defend a human being. And if Ukrainian troops are committing something bad during this 2 years and previous 8 years of wars, we honestly record it and push for independent official investigations. But we have no resources to work on territory of Russia in Kursk region, and that's why it's just opportunity for international organizations to work there.
So you've documented and you've collected a very, very large amount of information. Tell us what happens to that now, and you know, as the war goes on, you will continue collecting that information and those atrocities that are happening, which of course must be very, very difficult to do. But what happens then?
We closely cooperate with different international and national official institutions, which made official investigations and provide official assessments of the situation. For example, we work with International Criminal Court and send several submissions to prosecutor office. We work with International Commission on Inquiry, which was created by UN Human Rights Council. And just recently, they presented their next report about torture and sexual violence, which Russians commit in occupied territories, and they used also our information. We work with Moscow mechanism of OSCE and with the independent experts who present these mechanisms. And also we provide information which we collected to national legal enforcement bodies. The problem is that because war crimes is a constant policy of Russia, we faced with enormous amount of war crimes. And all international organizations, like, for example, International Criminal Court, will limit its investigation only to several selected cases. And that's why it poses a very clear question: who will provide a chance for justice to all people affected by this war when national system is overloaded?
Right. So how do you bring your perpetrators or those who are committing these war crimes to account while there still is a conflict or a war going on?
I think because we don't understand that justice is precondition to sustainable peace, and not just in our part of the world, but in the whole world. All this hell which we now face in Ukraine, it's a result of total impunity which Russia enjoyed for decades. Russia commit horrible crimes in Chechnya, in Moldova, in Georgia, in Mali, in Libya, in Syria. Russia has never been punished for these crimes. And that is why Russians believe they can do whatever they want. And if we want to prevent wars in the future, we have to punish the states and their leaders who start such wars in present. It's a common logic. But in the whole history of humankind, we have only one such a precedent. It was Nuremberg trial from past century. And that is why we now in this all mess, and that is why it's so important how Russian war of aggression against Ukraine will finish with justice or with impunity, because other authoritarian leaders from different parts of the world also watching, and if Russia succeeds, it will encourage them to do the same in their part of the world.
Now, one of your key messages is holding the perpetrators of war crimes to account, and you've been calling for a tribunal for Putin. Can you explain?
We have 4 types of international crimes. It's war crimes, crimes against humanity, genocide, and crime of aggression. And Russia is committing all these types of international crimes. But crime of aggression, it's a core, because all these atrocities which we now are documenting, it's result of the leadership decision of Putin and his surrounding to start this war. And the problem is that there is no international court which can prosecute Putin and top political leadership and high military command of the Russian state for the crime of aggression, because even International Criminal Court has no such jurisdiction in situation of Russian war against Ukraine. And that is why, in order to fill this gap and provide accountability, we have to create a special tribunal on aggression and hold Putin and other guilty in the crime of aggression accountable.
There needs to be enormous political will for that to happen. But also on top of that, the entire system, you've said, needs a complete rework. You said that the whole United Nations system of peace and security is collapsing before our eyes. Can you explain what that means for getting justice for the people of Ukraine?
It means not just for people of Ukraine, but people regardless where they live, that their security and their human rights defense dependent not on international law, but whether or not they live in a country with a strong military potential, whether or not they live in a country where people are ready to take arms and to defend their democratic choice. Whether or not this country is belong to a powerful military bloc, whether or not their country has nuclear weapon, whether or not the enemy has no oil and gas, because this means that others will close their eyes for atrocities and violations of international order, which the states is committing. And this is very dangerous world to live in. And that is why I always encourage to start a cardinal reform of UN system of peace and security, because we need such system on international level, which can effectively protect people against authoritarianism and the wars.
You've often been asked what international powers can do to help, and you've been in the strange position of, as a human rights lawyer, asking for more weapons.
For sure, it's not a long-term solution, but it's opportunity for people in Ukraine to survive, because Russians kill unarmed. Probably you remember these photos and videos from Bucha, Matizhin, Irpin, and other cities and settlements from Kyiv region, where after 2 weeks, first weeks of large-scale war, the dead bodies of men and women, civilians, were laid around the street until their liberation. We found the dead bodies of civilians in the gardens of their own households. We found the dead bodies of civilians in mass graves. Once again, men and women, civilians with their hands tied under their backs. We found the dead bodies of civilians in the cars. The whole family were shot while they tried to escape and save their children from this dangerous zone. These people have no arms at all. And that's why they can't defend themselves. And Russians came and killed them. Because the international system of peace and security is not working properly. And I, as a human rights lawyer, can't waive Geneva or Hague Convention in the face from Russian tank. Russian tank will not stop with this gesture. But for sure, it's a temporal solution. We need weapons in order to push back Russians and to help to deoccupy Ukrainian territories, to release people from terror, which Russia imposed on these territories, and not to provide Russia opportunity to capture more Ukrainian territories. But in future, we have to speak about a real new collective system of peace and security, and this has to be a long-term strategy.
We've seen your president, Zelensky, go to Washington recently and speak to both parties, all sides of the political spectrum in the US, asking for more weapons and more support. Why do you think Western powers seem to be holding back or dragging their feet?
I think it's something in human psychology which we experienced before the Second World War started, when Everything was very obvious, but reality was so dangerous and so uncomfortable that political leaders of different countries don't want to accept this reality. I think it's very human. When you don't like reality, you try to reject it. But the truth is that we live in a very interconnected world, and that's why, your fight is our fight, and that's why we see how authoritarian regimes united and help each other. Like China helped Russia to see common sanctions and import technologies critical to warfare. North Korea sent to Russia more than 1 million artillery shells. Syria votes for Russia in UN General Assembly, and Iran provided missiles and drones to Russia. So if authoritarian regimes created this authoritarian bloc and trying to fight against the free world also has to be united to accept this reality and start to change this reality for better.
Right. And if I want to bring it down to your average person, your average citizen, on what's at stake if Russia is allowed to continue on this path of immunity and we're seeing these authoritarian regimes, as you say, band together and get stronger, what's at stake for ordinary people who often see it as someone else's problem, not ours?
It will have a very global negative consequences if I will not be able to stop Russia. First, I mentioned before that Russia will go further. We interviewed a lot of people who survived Russian captivity, and they told that Russian soldiers explained their vision of the future like this, that first we will occupy Ukraine, and then together with you, we will go to conquer another countries. And the process of forcible mobilization of Ukrainian citizens to Russian army, all these years is going on in occupied territories. But also, it's not just Russia and Ukraine war. As I mentioned, this war has a very vivid value dimension. And China is watching, North Korea is watching, Syria is watching, Iran is watching, and they all know that this international system of peace and security is not working anymore. And they all want to challenge this international order with a force, with a brutal force, in order to gain some benefits. So they don't want to live not in a world of rule of law, but rule of force. And if we will not set a precedent that if you violate international order, and if have no respect to internationally recognized borders, when you allow yourself to invade another countries, to kill people there, to erode their identity, you will be punished. If you will not set such precedent, they will do the same.
When Russia invaded Ukraine on February 24th, 2022, the world was shocked. But since then, so much has happened. We're seeing the Middle East in turmoil now, with Gaza and possibly more conflicts breaking out there. Are you concerned that Ukraine will fall off the agenda for many countries and governments?
Oh, for sure, it can happen. Like before, the world closed their eyes of pain of people in Syria. The war in Syria is still going on. I know from my colleagues and friends, Syrian human rights defenders, that people are being tortured, subjected to sexual violence, and killed every day. And Syria is not anymore in the front page of media, and it seems that the world get used that there is a gray zone on the map where human beings are treated like this. And this is a very problematic thing because the unpunished evil grows, and they come closer and closer to people who think that they live in stable and developed democracies and enjoying security for granted for dozens of years. Once again, everything is very interconnected, and that is why people who take freedom for granted, once they can found themselves in circumstances that freedom will disappear, and now they have to step from the zone of comfort and do something in order to return their freedom.
What are the warning signs that the international community and Ukraine should have clocked before the 2022 invasion by Russia? And can you put that in the context of an autocracy which threatens smaller and less powerful democracies?
I think that we very need decisive actions to show Russia that they will never get Ukraine, that their plans that West will forget about their obligation and their moral and law commitment. It's illusion that they will never get Ukraine. And there are very simple signs which show this message. The international community has to create special tribunal on aggression and start historical process in 21st century to show example that when a leader of a state started aggressive war, this leader and his surrounding will be prosecuted. We need to confiscate Russian frozen assets. We have more than 300 billion euro in G7 countries. It's a huge amount. Ukraine received like a small portion of support in comparison with this amount. And this money has to be transferred for self-defense of Ukraine and reconstruction of Ukraine. Also, we need to close the back door for sanctions. Russia restructured together with the authoritarian alliance the global system in a way that they can import even technologies critical to warfare. And we found in drones and planes the chips and elements from United States companies, from Germany companies, from France companies, from Switzerland companies. So we have to punish these companies for a violation of sanction regime. And like a lot of things has to be done. Which shows this decisive will, because the logic of authoritarian leaders always the same. They respect only force. They disrespect weakness. When they see weakness, they will attack.
Now, here in Taiwan, there are many parallels drawn, given Taiwan's powerful neighbor, China, which claims Taiwan as part of its own territory. What lessons do you think that we need to learn here from Ukraine's experience in defending sovereignty and civil rights?
I think that you have to learn the very simple thing that you have no time. If you want to live in peace, you have to prepare for all possible scenarios. And this is not obligation just of political elites or for militaries. It's obligation for each person in society. It's common obligation, which you have to fulfill now because you have no time. You never know what will happen tomorrow.
Saying that, what kind of support would you like to see from Taiwan?
Probably I will use this opportunity to express my sincere gratitude to people in Taiwan for your support, because we in Ukraine feel it, and we know that probably we are far from each other due geographical distance, but we very close due to values. And we know that people in Taiwan also respect freedom and see it like important values in hierarchy of values. And we know that we are all fighting for the same issues, because freedom has no limitation in national borders. So thank you very much for your support, for your solidarity, because it's, even from the human point of view, very important to know that you are not alone when you face with such enormous opposing power. And I would never wish anyone to go through our experience.
And given that while politicians and governments are being lobbied for help with Ukraine's defense, you've also spoken about the power of ordinary people. What can we do?
I know from the whole of my experience, and I'm working in human rights field for 20 years, in different type of contexts, because we only 10 years ago got a chance to build democratic institutions, but before we live under autocracy ruler of pro-Russian, corrupt and authoritarian government. when the law doesn't work, like now we have during large-scale war. So I know that when you can't rely on the legal instruments, you can still rely on people, because people have a much more power than they can even imagine. Let me express it with one personal story. During the Revolution of Dignity, when millions of Ukrainians stood up their voice against pro-Russian, corrupt, authoritarian government, the government responded with a systematic and large-scale organized repressions. And I was the head of civil initiative Euromaidan SOS, which worked 24 hours per day to provide legal assistance to persecuted protesters. And every day, hundreds and hundreds of people who were beaten, arrested, tortured, accused in fabricated criminal cases passed through our care. So we was against the whole state authoritarian machine. When criminal group Titushki cooperated with prosecutors cooperated with courts and police, the former president, former governments, security service, and majority of parliament were against people, were against peaceful protest. They want to liquidate it, even physically. And like it can produce some feeling that of learned helplessness, because you found yourself in an environment when the law doesn't work, when state institutions who are designed to protect human rights and try to liquidate you even physically. And that's why Ukrainian artists made a picture of drop, and they made a title to this picture: "We are drop in the ocean," which means, yes, we are human beings, we are not God, and probably our efforts are modest, but together we are ocean, and together we can change the history.
Oleksandra Matviichuk, 2022 Nobel Peace Prize laureate and head of the Center for Civil Liberties, speaking to me from Kyiv, Ukraine. Thank you for watching. It has been good to have your company. If you've enjoyed today's episode or have anything you'd like to add to the dialogue, do join the conversation on our social media. And remember, stay informed, stay engaged, and stay connected.